Live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bring Them Home podcast webinar live stream with Rabbi Pinchas Winston weekly on Thursday evenings, sponsored by Bring Them Home, Josh Wander, and IsraelTorah.org, and the Miriam Project Geula Hour. The Bring Them Home project is a new project, but it's a very timely one. We're trying to encourage people to make Aliyah. There's a website you can go to, bringthemhome.org, when you'll find resources that will provide you Torah resources to explain why you should be making Aliyah right now, Jews from the diaspora. And there's lots of podcasts and videos and all kinds of wonderful resources to help you get started. We're working closely with Nefesh B'Nefesh and the Jewish Agency. We can help you with a lot of different aspects of your Aliyah. You can find us on Facebook, live on YouTube channel, and there's also a Facebook page called Emergency Aliyah. So please check all those Facebook pages out and the live YouTube Bring Them Home videos and recorded videos as well. Rabbi Winston gives a beautiful shiur every single week for us. The Miriam Project, just a small word about that. It's a project that I've had for a while, the Miriam Project Geula Hour. I interview people to discuss the times that we're living in, the times of Geula, the end of days, the times of redemption, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same. It's also very closely related to Aliyah. I interview people and discuss the issues of what we should do to prepare for the Geula and just pretty much to raise the consciousness of it. You can find the Miriam Project Geula Hour on Facebook and also on SoundCloud.com. Lots of good recordings. Rabbi Winston, of course, is there a few times. And, of course, Rabbi Winston, without a big introduction, we would like to know that he's from Toronto originally. He was given rabbinic ordination by Rabbi Avraham Kovshitz Zetzel, Rabbi Noah Weinberg. He worked with closely for many, many years at Aish HaTorah, Toronto, and Yerushalayim. And, of course, his website is 36.org, spelled out TIRTYSIX.org. And what you will find on this website is amazing resources for all kinds of different topics of Jewish nature altogether, from Aliyah to Kabbalah to mindfulness in Torah to topics on Eretz Israel to also all different Parsha writings and everything you might want to know about Israel and mindfulness, Torah, and Aliyah. His most recent webinar he's been giving is called The Physics of Kabbalah. And it's a current webinar. I highly recommend it. Go to 36 online bookstore. We'll give you information about that. And without further ado, Rabbi Winston this week will speak about why we care about saving America. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us. And thank you, Josh.
Thank you again. Thank you. It's a difficult time to be involved in the news. You know, it gets to the point where you just don't even want to read it half the time, see what's happening, because aside from being very confusing, you see and hear a lot of things just don't make sense. The world has changed dramatically, at least on the outside. It's been changing that way for many decades. We just didn't pay attention as much as we should have the entire time, and now it's finally coming out into the open. And depending upon your political affiliation and how you look at the world, from a Torah perspective, we see things a certain way. From a secular perspective, they see things another way. And it's a person just gets to the point where it's like, I've had enough. First of all, I am originally Canadian, so I don't vote. I have no say in American politics. I don't really want to say in American politics, but it's not really relevant to me in that respect. It became more relevant, I think, moving to Israel because of the very close relationship between Israel and the States. And I live in the Middle East, I live over here. And we learned around 2008, before that, we saw ourselves, or the country saw itself, as being extremely dependent upon the United States of America. You know, extremely grateful to all the help that they've given the Jews living there. And we've had the country that's an ally of the United States. But we learned to become more independent, thank God. I mean, miraculously, over the course of 70 to 80 years, we have been able to accomplish pretty much the impossible. If you take a step back and look at the whole thing, clearly the hand of God visible in all of it. And it's afforded us some type of independence. So as time goes on, as we saw the relationship being affected by the past presidents and different situations arising, and the the increased involvement of the Arab world in American politics. So you get to the point where it's like it's there, it's important. I mean, but how much? How much should I really care? So last week when I was reflecting on this particular idea, and I asked myself a question that if American Jews were not living there, if there weren't 5 million, almost 6 million Jews living in the United States of America, I wasn't so concerned about their well-being and about their safety. Would I care that much about what is happening in the United States of America? Obviously, there's another aspect, financially as well. My main organization is American-based. It's an American nonprofit organization, 36.org. Most of my sponsors, most of my sales of books and support comes from that side of the world. So obviously, I'm very much affected by that. If the Jews weren't living there, I wouldn't have that either, because that's all tied together. But all that aside, is that the only reason why I care? Is that the only reason why I'm concerned about the direction of the United States of America? Or is there something deeper? Is there something more to it? Like, why am I so sensitive to what's happening there? Why am I so affected by the direction of the country, the things that are being said, and all the events that have been occurring? Is it just an emotional thing, or is there something more to it than that? Now, I will begin with a caveat, meaning that obviously people have their political affiliations. You could be very surprised. You think everybody's on the same page as you, especially if they're also living by Torah. I learned this the hard way many, many years ago. I was actually traveling in the States on a speaking trip, and I stopped by a particular bookstore to pick up a check for some books that had been sold through the store. And I was talking to the accountant, who was a Haredi from Torah observant. The whole store was that way, and she certainly was that as well. And we're talking about, I won't mention any names, but certain president who was very friendly to the United States of America versus the person running against him, who was not so friendly and had other issues involved. And being an Israeli at this point, coming from that part of the world, and even just being a Canadian, but I just took it for granted that this person would agree with the position that I had taken up in terms of the upcoming election. And to my shock and my surprise, it was not the case. And she was very polite about it, Baruch Hashem, and I got my check and said goodbye and went my way. But I realized from that point onward that there's not a lot of accounting for people's political views, and you can get those people who you would think would support your point of view, and they do, and those people who you think for sure would, and they don't. So I'm not looking to step on anyone's toes, and I'm not looking to offend anybody. I'm not looking to tell people how to vote. None of that stuff. I'm looking at just a particular concept that I do not think is being appreciated, certainly not by people who are not aware of this concept and the importance of it, but even by those people who should be aware of it and be able to acknowledge the importance of this idea. I did spend a fair bit of time in high school and college learning American history. Unfortunately, I forget a lot of it. It's always been very fascinating for me. I love history in general. And I remember, you go back, and there's actually a book that was printed called The Effect of Hebrew on Western Civilization. I have not seen the book for many years, but it was printed a long time ago. And the book basically showed how much Jewish insignia there are. I don't know if there still is to this very day, but in college campus, logos or their different insignia they use, and around the world, but specifically in the United States of America, a lot of Jewish, things alluding to Torah concepts, and perhaps the most important, most prominent one is probably the American Constitution, because at the time that they wrote that, even though they weren't Jewish and they weren't religious per se necessarily, but they had a lot of respect, as did many Europeans, for the Bible, and particularly the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament. And when they sat down to work out what to put into the Constitution, they relied very heavily on a lot of the concepts, civil concepts that were in the Torah. You have to understand, we're going back to the time of the French Revolution, and I was actually a little later, but even earlier, society didn't have these rules. They didn't live according to these rules. So it was mostly a caste system. which meant that if you were born into wealth, more than likely you stayed that well. But if you're born into poverty, more than likely you stayed that way as well. And there wasn't much you could do about that. Once in a while, maybe someone broke the mold and got out of the system for some reason. But that's the way it was for many years, and beating people and taxing them as you want. It wasn't such a fair society. People who had the upper hand literally had the upper hand. And when they designed the Constitution to be the basis of a brand new country in the Western world that would be similar to Europe in the positive ways, but leave behind many of the negative things, so they based themselves upon the Torah, upon the Bible. And these concepts became the foundation of American society, which is why American society has been probably one of the best places for anyone to grow up in the Western world, the modern world, because of its values and its opportunities that come from the rules that were laid down back at the beginning. Of course, one of the biggest problems that people have with this and questions that they have on the whole thing is that that's nice, but many of them were slave owners. They had slaves. They went to, I did actually realize it until recently, but they went to South Africa and they purchased slaves actually that were already slaves. Many of them, it wasn't they just rounded them up and captured them, but many were already slaves in the first place. They brought them over to the United States of America to work the land, to work on their behalf, and they had slaves. Slaves was a very common thing in society at that time. So a person would say, well, isn't that hypocrisy? Isn't it a hypocrisy that they're trying to emulate the Torah and make a country that's more godlike, and they go ahead and imprison people and abuse them? Because who wants to be a slave? Nobody. Every person is born is a Tzelem Elokim, is created in the image of God and has the right to live that way. We can damage that. We can do things that can interfere with that opportunity, but certainly to have it imposed upon you from birth, that's a real corruption of society that goes back to the fact that the Jewish people failed to be the light unto nations that they should have been, to teach the world the truth about God and Torah and how the world's supposed to go. Because if we don't do it, nobody will. And it, as much as Christianity took many of these concepts and brought it to the far reaches of the world, there was always something different, not exactly the same thing, because the proof is in the pudding. They had crusades where they're murdering people who don't agree with their philosophy. And Jews were not the only ones who suffered. There are many other religions who they met along the way and did not want to give up their ways and were killed instead because they were called infidels, or they rejected Christian theology and they suffered as a result of that. That's not Judaism. The only time that we ever had a mitzvah to do something like that was when we came to the land of Canaan. And even that we couldn't do. Even that was hard for us. It was certainly not willingly. Had it not been commanded to us by God himself, we would never have done it. We tried to make peace with many of the nations, but in the end, the ones that we should have, in fact, carried out the sentence against, we couldn't do it. And as a result of that, we ended up losing the land, just as God promised would be the case in last week's Parsha, that they would eventually influence us and take us away from Judaism and cause the downfall of the Jewish people and all the exiles that have happened since then. But if you turn it into Parshas Mishpatim, the Jewish people, of course, themselves were slaves. And so therefore, one would assume that slavery is something that Judaism is completely against. But if you open Parshas Mishpatim, it talks about slavery. Now, if you stop the broadcast right here and you quote me like that, you can be sure I will get tremendous amount of hate mail and who knows what else after that. But everything has to be qualified. First of all, the slavery that's being spoken about the Torah is talking about the Canaanim anyhow, who should not have been allowed to survive. Now, if that's a problem, you have to go look at the Torah, look at the history, and understand where that's coming from. It's not an easy thing today to swallow, agreed, but it cannot be taken superficially. But the other type of slavery that the Torah actually talks about is if, for example, somebody who steals and cannot afford to pay back what they took, so they, in fact, will be sold into slavery to pay off their debt. But as the Gemara points out, when it comes to a slave like that, if you acquire a slave like that, it's more that you acquire an owner because the Torah has very specific rules. And in this week's Parsha, it talks about that the slave could only work this more like an apprentice in the end. But he's called a slave. He's called Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave. And at the end of 6 years, by the Shemitah year, he has to go free, unless he himself chooses to remain. But he has to go free, otherwise. And as the Gemara points out, the Torah itself points out, that when he does go free, you have to give him things. You have to give him gifts. You have to start him off, with a whole new life. He's paid off his debt. He's basically been like an indentured worker. That's more or less what he was. He shouldn't have stolen in the first place, especially if he can't pay it back. And this is how he pays it back this way. But even after he leaves, he gets all kinds of goodies, grab bags, party favors on the way out. The only point I'm making right now is that you see from this that slavery is mentioned in the Torah. We don't have slavery today. We're never really into it. Certainly, it's nothing to be promoted. And as I mentioned before, it's very specific parameters. I'm just pointing out that the fact that the founding fathers of America, that they themselves were okay with the concept of slavery, was not a contradiction to the fact that they based the American Constitution on the Torah, because the Torah itself talks about that. Now, perhaps they didn't understand exactly how it works and what's permissible, what's not permissible, but I'm just pointing out as a concept. The way that slaves were treated was wrong. The way that they went about getting them was also wrong. And probably America should never have had slaves whatsoever at any point. It's not even probably. Shouldn't have happened. But it happened. And that's what was going on in history at that point in time. The amazing thing is not that. That's not the unusual thing. The amazing thing is that in the 1800s, that Abraham Lincoln, how could they destroy his statue? He comes along and he puts the entire country at risk, certainly his life and certainly his presidency at risk, to free the slaves. And he fights a bloody war, a civil war, over this particular point. And they win. And they force, the South, which was predominantly Democratic, right? They were the Democrats at the time, for the most part, forces them, either they're going to leave the Union, or they're going to have to abandon the concept of slavery, which is exactly what they do. And it's a long road uphill from that point onward until there's any kind of equality, if there even is. All the arguments have been going on for decades, if not longer, about exactly how equal things are, how much of an opportunity that the Black population has had while living in America. It's a long story. It's not one that I'm fully versed in, that I understand, and that I can even have an opinion about. Well, other than the fact that it's a non-concept that it's just everybody has to be treated equally, given fair opportunity, if they are in fact working to uphold the laws of a country, if they are in fact buying into the rules of that particular country. Otherwise, you're free to move. But when you live in a particular place, if that place itself is trying to be lawful and is based upon good principles, then if you want to change it, there's a form for that. But to impose a change itself, it's very destructive, very destructive. And it's more than that. America is more than a country, clearly. It's a concept. It's a concept that up until it was founded back in 1776, nothing like it existed. It was a tremendous step forward in terms of a society, a Western society, that was moving closer in the direction of the God-given Torah itself. A long way off. Nobody asked them to do this, but this is the direction they were in fact going. They realized these were important values to inculcate into society, and that's the direction they went. And for the longest time, for hundreds of years, they tried to uphold those principles. There was a democratic process. People had a say. They had a voice. They could vote. They could be part of the decision-making process. If anything, what went wrong is the power corrupted people to whom it was given. The average person working in the country, trying to earn an honest living, trying to make it work for themselves and their family, and then vote according to the due process to have the say in the direction of the country, for the most part, they're doing exactly what's expected of them. They could do more. Right? We have Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. There are 7 Noachide laws that everyone should live by, but no one's really teaching that. And it got lost along the way. And then came Christianity that kind of muddled the whole thing by teaching people that was not important anymore, that they had a new kivun, a new direction to go. So, what could be expected unless somebody is going to go out and A, prove the Torah is true that came from God, and B, show people that this is where you're supposed to live. So it was a major step to move that direction to be that civil as a society. And that's the way it was for the longest time. Where things began to go astray and really deteriorate was more to do with governments, the government itself. As they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I remember being in high school and learning about the philosopher king. The philosopher king, because power is dangerous. Anyone who gets it, anybody, almost anything, you become corrupt to some degree. It's almost impossible not to be affected by it. There are stories of certain rebbes, Chassidic rebbes, who were afraid. They earned their position. They were the leaders of their Chassidus. They had many followers who had tremendous respect for them and lots of awe. And it's very easy for a person to take that to heart too much. So they cut the bottoms of their boots out. They were dressed royally as the position required, and they looked the part completely, and they acted the part, but they left the bottom of their boots off so they were walking on ground. They could feel the ground on their feet. Not exactly sure how that works, but that's what it says they did. And whether it's true or not, the concept is true, because they understood the power of power to corrupt. Now, that's talking about a God-fearing person. That's talking about somebody who believes in Torah and mitzvahs and the world to come. Somebody who's afraid, if I make a mistake in this world, it's going to cost me in the next world. But what happens if the person is not so strong with their belief or has no belief? Well, for the longest time, religion had tremendous sway over the population. Even people, let's say, who didn't really even believe that much in religion or their particular type of religion. Nevertheless, society had rules and imposed upon. There was a time you couldn't work on Sunday. There was a time that the law was you can't work on Sunday. Maybe you don't have to go to church, but you certainly can't work and do certain activities that are. It's a day of rest. Our day of rest, of course, is Shabbos, and we have God laws that tell us what we can and can't do. But that was the mentality of people for the longest time. The bottom line is that any society that's going to be connected to God in any level, in any way, is somewhat of a representation of God in this world. There's a certain aspect of the Malchus. There's a halacha, for example, a law, that you're supposed to make a bracha, a blessing, if you see a king. There's one for a specific one for a Jewish king, and there's also one for a Gentile king. And there's different explanations to why that blessing is unique and separate, and why we say it at all. But one main reason is because it's royalty, it's malchus, it's kingdom. For us to relate to God, we have to have flesh and blood examples down here. One of the reasons why, if you look at the 10 Commandments, 2 sides, right? You've got, I'm the Lord your God. Don't take the Lord, God's name in vain. That's the third one. The second one is there should be no other gods beside me. The fourth one is that keep the Shabbos. And the fifth one is honor your father and mother. The second set is don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, right? Don't bear false witness, and don't covet your neighbor's wife, donkey, whatever he has, his possessions. Don't covet that. And they point out that the first set of tablets, the first tablet itself, are mitzvahs ben adam lemakom, mitzvahs between man and God. And the second side are mitzvahs ben al lechavero, between man and his fellow. Don't murder, don't commit adultery. They're all like between you and your neighbor, other people in the world. The only acceptance of the rule is the mitzvah to honor your father and mother and respect them and to have fear of them. And that's on the first side. So it's like, what happened? God said, well, I think it's like 6 and 4, and I could maybe stick all 6 on the second side and just have 4 on the first side, but I have to space it differently. The typesetting gets complicated like that. And, I'll just stick it, that one over here, and we'll call it a day. So of course that's not the case. 5 and 5. And the reason is that it's given why it is that you have the five on on one side with the one that seems to be between people amongst people, is because, as the rabbis explain, that in order to be able to honor and respect God, you have to first learn how to honor and respect your parents. They're the first authority figures that we know in life, which shows you, by the way, how important, how there's a mitzvah actually not to respect your parents, but as parents to be respectable to your children. Children have to be able to respect you, because if they don't, then they're not going to respect God later on either. That's where the authority breaks down. Being your child's best friend doesn't work in terms of developing that child as someone who can one day have respect and fear for God. So that mitzvah, ben adam lechavero, is actually a mitzvah ben adam lemakom, between you and God, because it prepares you for your relationship with God. That's the idea, basically. So, we make a blessing on any king, because when there's something special about royalty, you make fun of the queen or the king or whatever the case may be. And it may be a non-entity. It may be something that's not even important. They don't even run the government anymore. They're not involved in politics. They're basically doing what kings and queens do when they're not involved in politics. Nonetheless, there's something that happens. And this, by the way, is very instructional in terms of this time of year. It's very important because Rosh Hashanah is coming up. And Rosh Hashanah is the time that the king sits in judgment. The king of kings, sits in judgments. And he's going to be there regardless. It doesn't make a difference whether there's corona, COVID, or not. It doesn't make a difference if we're in shul or not in shul. It doesn't make a difference if we can blow shofar or we can't blow shofar. God himself, the King of Kings, he shows up every Rosh Hashanah regardless. The only question that we really have is, will we be there? And what do I mean by will we be there? Well, physically we'll be there, get dressed up, get haircuts, whatever the case may be, have a nice, beautiful meal, and it's Rosh Hashanah. How could you miss it? God forbid, it's the day of judgment. Yeah, that's intellectually. But what about emotionally? What about connecting to the reality? Well, I don't live with the concept of God all year round. Even in the Shemona Esrei, we say a Kela Kadosh in the Brucha, Atak Kadosh in Shemona Esrei, and we finish off Hakela Kadosh. On Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, we change it to a Melcha Kadosh. Why not all year round? Because the concept is very distant from us. And that's why the Rambam points out, Maimonides points out, that you can do tshuva all year round. You can repent any moment of time all year round. As the Pri Tzaddik points out, the word Shabbos itself stands for the three letters of Shabbos, or Shin, Beis, Taf, stand for Shabbos Bo Tshuva. On Shabbos, you can do tshuva. It's a day of tshuva to reconcile your life with what God wants from you. And it's always possible. So why don't I always do it? Why am I more inspired Rosh Hashanah time, aside from the fact that, the Gemara says that God's judging you every day, all the time, every hour. There's always judgment. So then what's unique about Rosh Hashanah? What's unique about Rosh Hashanah is the fact that the king is here. He's made himself more available. Ani ladodi, ladodi li. The letters Elul, right? Aleph, Lamed, Elul, Vav Lamed, right? Stand for Ani ladodi. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Because God's coming closer. And if you want to be able to be ready on Rosh Hashanah, like the Arizal, the famous Kabbalist from the 1500s, points out, he says that anybody who's able to, they find themselves in tears the moment 3 stars come out on the night of Rosh Hashanah, even before Baruch Hu, in Mariv, but at least by Baruch Hu, they start to cry, they start to feel the weight of the din. He says it's a good sign, because it means you've been judged and favorably already. But it's like you show up Rosh Hashanah, you're not really ready. We don't do the preparation time. So the rabbis gave us a whole month. Elul, they focused on Elul. It's a time that God's coming closer and closer, and we blow the shofar every single day except for Shabbos to arouse that but we're trying to get a sense of malchus. And the emotions are affected by what we think, what our mentality is. So we're supposed to do whatever we can to build up our understanding and appreciation of malchus, to be able to relate to God that way, not after it's already come in, but in advance of Rosh Hashanah. So when the day actually begins, it's not the person has, for example, a court case. God forbid someone sued a person or they got in trouble for something, and it's a question of either winning or losing. If they lose, they might go to jail or have to pay a very stiff fine, money they can't afford. They don't just show up and say, oh, this is the day of my court case. Oh, look, it's almost 3 o'clock. Let's go. Time to go to court. They don't do that. They think about it. They hire a lawyer. They go into discussions. They work out the case in advance. It has to be by the time they come into the court and face the judge or face the jury, they are ready, as if everything has already happened. They have dry runs. They actually have dry runs. That's what we're supposed to be doing as well. When we make a blessing on a king, even if he's not our king, from another country, even today, if he's an official monarch, official king. When I was in Israel about 25, 30 years ago, I think the king of Spain came, he came, to visit, and there was a whole bunch of people talking about going to see him just to be able to make this blessing. Very special. Because somehow when we look at that, we see that malchus, it gives us more of an appreciation for God's malchus, and he likes that because that helps with the relationship. So anything that by definition can point you in the direction of God, it's not just good for that thing. It's not just good for the people living there. It's good for the whole world. For all we know, that's what's held off strict judgment. We're coming off a 70 to 80 year period of time, unprecedented in recent history, certainly for the Jewish people. Because in Europe, we live from day to day in poverty and fear of being killed, of blood libels, and not knowing if we will live or our children will live to get married. That was the way it was for the longest time. And before that, there were the Crusades, and before that, there were the Romans and the Greeks. We haven't had much of a respite over the course of thousands of years. And here we find ourselves suddenly, growing up, living in America, where we can buy houses, we have good jobs, we're making money, we can give tzedakah, we can make Shabbos mechubadik with kavod and all that. And more important than anything else is that we're able to live with self-dignity, because everything else flows from that. It's hard to keep Shabbos properly if you don't feel like you count in any real way. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's hard to be nice to other people, to be chesedic and give tzedakah when you feel that you're resentful for the fact that you don't have much in life. Many Jews became part of the Haskalah, the breakaway group that became secular at the back in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, because of the poverty, because of all the suffering the Jewish people had gone through for the longest time. They took it as a sign that God's just not with us, and why bother? Why make the effort? They jumped to what they thought was an easier and a better life. So anything that somehow connects you on any level to the reality of God, who prints on their dollar bill, "In God we trust"? All jokes aside. At some point in time, people say, well, when they say God, they actually mean the dollar bill itself. That, and God, the money is the God, and that's what we're trusting in. And, maybe eventually that's the way it became. But that wasn't the intention at the very beginning. The concept behind, that's a small thing. But who prints that on their money? The Israelis certainly haven't. God's not even mentioned in the Israeli Constitution. But in the American Constitution, it mentions God and talks about it. And man made in his image. And you can say it's lip service. It doesn't make a difference. It's there. It didn't have to be there, but it's there. And it was viable for the longest time. And then, as societies are wont to do, it began to become more liberal. And usually becoming more liberal usually means somehow it comes around historically, not my opinion, history's opinion, less moral. Oh, well, what do you mean by moral? Well, how do you define moral? What's the source of morality? Man-made, nature versus nurture. Where'd that come? Well, the Torah itself. That's the only known source of morality that we have. So if you're a secular Jew, just a secular person, and you don't believe in God and you don't believe in Torah, so whatever I'm saying right now doesn't matter to you. But I didn't ask you why you should care. Although the truth is, there's no difference, as people find out later on down the road, as many Germans found out later on down the road, and certainly the German Jews found out down the road. It makes a difference down. In the end, all the things we thought we could do without and abandon, you take God out of society, you extract him, and you throw him away. You get rid of the signs of it, and you can call it. This is the basis of a free society. That's what people are fighting for right now: a free society. This without even police, without even anyone like we can trust ourselves. Like people, once in a while you'll find there might be some people who have enough of a conscience, enough of a sense of perspective. They can see the big picture well enough to be able to put their own personal sentiments aside for the greater good. But that's not 7 point whatever billion people in the world. We have Yetzer Haras. We have not been properly educated. We don't understand the goals of mankind, of creation. We don't understand the good potentials. We don't understand the bad potentials well enough to be able to be left on our own. The only time you want to be left on your own is when you plan to do something that you know is not going to be acceptable and you don't want to get caught. Let's just wait until the teacher leaves the classroom, and then we'll start flinging elastic bands and things like that. We can't do it now, right? Because you need that enforcement. Even the Torah itself says it. Pasha Shoftim talks about Shoftim v'Shotrim, judges and a legal system, and police who enforce the laws and the rules of the judges. But not just any judge. The Gemara says when judges become corrupt and they bend the law to their will, as opposed to bending their will to the will of God, then everything falls apart. That's not called being a judge. That's not judgment. That's not godly. And the world moves further away. So we talk about caring for America, aside from the fact that so many Jews are still there and their lives could easily be in danger at any moment in time. There's absolutely no reason to assume that this exile will end differently than the ones in the past. There's no reason to assume that somehow we're going to be spared what's happened to Jews who stayed so too long in the past. We can hope there is, right? Absolutely. And dreams and maybe prophecies that we haven't heard about yet, fine, right? But if you want to take that risk, but that's not the issue. That's not what we're discussing right now. If the question was, should I be concerned about the direction of America because of the welfare of 5.5 million Jews? Yes, 100%. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zelazeh. Every Jew is a guarantor for another Jew. Famous story they tell about the Chazon Ish at the turn of the last century, where there are a lot of blood libels taking place in Russia at that time. And they wanted to say, as someone did in Canada, even when I think it was a teenager, someone in Saskatchewan tried the exact same thing, to say that the Talmud is really provokes hatred of other people. And he tried to get it rejected from the country. Baruch Hashem, in the end, the Canadian government legal system saw through that and realized that's not the case. But it's been done many times before, and they tried the same thing in Russia. And one of the things they focused on, and this person did the same thing as well. It's a famous, piece of Gemara that people look at to make this point when they're looking to have a blood libel. And they said, if you look at the Gemara says that it refers to the Jewish people as Adam, as a person. And it refers to the nations of the world as the nations of the world. Nothing derogatory, just Umas. And they wanted to say that shows you that the Jewish people do not look at the rest of the world as being on the same level, that they're a person, they're human, and everybody else is subhuman. Well, the Gemara doesn't say that. So the Jewish community in Russia, you're dealing with a blood libel, it's not the easiest thing to get out of, because it doesn't make a difference what the truth is. The point is, can they make their argument stand up long enough to carry out judgment and perhaps even execution? And they turned to Chazon Ish and they asked them, how do we answer this thing? So he said, when it comes to a body, if the foot hurts, the heart's affected, the head's affected, your body's affected. When one part of your body can be the most remote part of your body, so far away, you have a headache, your whole body feels it. Sometimes literally because your body feels like the pain. Other times because since it's debilitating, it doesn't make you feel like do anything. You just feel like hanging out and just, convalescing. So it's all affected. The body's a single unit. You cannot ignore one section for the other sections. So he said, when it comes to the nations of the world, they don't function like that. The fact that some nation is starving over there doesn't make every nation jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, we need to help out. Their pain is our pain. But when it comes to the Jewish people, they could be 6,000 miles away. Look, this blood libel is taking place, and I'm in Eretz Israel, and we got Jews in America who are fighting for the same thing. And that's why we're called the Dam, because we're like a single unit. So I can't say, well, I made the move. I'm over here. Baruch Hashem, I'm where I belong at this stage of history. They did. They had the opportunity. I don't care anymore. Can't do that. Believe me, when the Holocaust was taking place, as grateful as American Jewry was to be there and safe and protected from the evils of the Nazi regime, they could not celebrate Shabbos in any normal way, knowing that the rest of their nation, the rest of their people were suffering the way they were. Because that's the way we function. I have to care. I have just no choice. It's part of who I am, part of being, the Jewish people. What about the fact that I have a business there? What about the fact that this is where, 100%, there's no question. I got to be concerned about that. Although God has many ways to give a person parnasa, things shift, things change. Even the coronavirus forces to readapt, or to adapt to the situation and readapt, whatever the case, 100%, right? But that's not the issue. The issue right now is America as a concept, America as a country. And since the country was based upon some Torah values, and God was evident, present in the process of making it a country and the way it runs itself, that's a big step in the right direction. What about all the corruption, all the crime, all the people who don't hold by these? It's always going to be that type of imperfection. With the same thing here, even the Jewish people, when the entire country lived by Torah, had to deal with situations like that. But now that the world's going the other direction, now that America is taking big steps in that opposite direction, it started back in the Obama administration, if not sooner. But as far as I know, he was the first one to sanction the taking down of statues, anything that alluded to godly things, religion, because it wasn't fair to impose religion upon other people. That's not what was happening. No one was forcing anyone to go to church or synagogue because of a statue was in front. It was just a reminder that this country is founded upon Torah values, and there's a thing called God in the world. That's all it was. And that's called in your face? No. But it wasn't about that. It never was. It was about setting the teacher of the classroom. Because as long as I have some kind of reminder, this is why people often hate religious people. They don't even know them. They don't even bother them. They live in different parts of the world. I was once talking to a secular Jew. In fact, we don't have to go very far. The Gemara itself says that Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, says that before he became religious, before he became a Baal Tshuva at the age of 40, he said if a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, had walked by him, he would have bitten him like a donkey. And his students say, Rebbe, like a dog, right? No, like a donkey, because a donkey bites right to the bone. That's how much I wanted to bite. Now I'm one of those people I wanted to bite. But back then, why? Because every time one walks by, it's a reminder to me of what I'm not doing, what I have not been able to achieve. I've got this desire to be like that. Every human being was made B'Tselem Elohim, was made in the image of God. Every single one of them. Even somebody who's not fully conscious, who may have been born with some type of defect. It doesn't make a difference. It's a tzolom elokus. There's an neshama in there. The body may be damaged, but not the soul. The soul's inside. It's not a child soul, an adult soul. It's a soul. We're made in the image of God. And we're supposed to work on dropping the image part and become more godly by the end of our life. Everybody has to be able to do that to the best of their ability. It doesn't make a difference who you are, where you are, what you're doing. You can be in prison in Russia, God forbid, and still be able to do it. A person can be a slave and still do it. Because it just means, not that we're just as a small thing over here, but it means that you are doing the best to hang on to your morality, to your sense of godly values, in spite of all the adversity. And in some respects, in many respects, when you do that in the face of adversity, that's the biggest sanctification of God's name there is. We call that, dying al kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of God through death, or even just life through actions. When you daven with intention, you put extra effort into that. When you keep Shabbos in a way that's not like, it's another Shabbos, let's just do it, just do it. No, it's more than that. It's a whole different Madrid. When people say, wow, this person must really believe, because look at the way they keep Shabbos. This person must really believe. Look at the way they pray to God. Look at the way the person behaves in public. He controls his temper. He's refined spiritually. That's a sanctification of the name of God. And the world lives off that. The reason why the flood came in 1656 from creation was because there was no longer enough merit in the world, no longer enough godliness in the world to counterbalance the evil, and therefore God said, we need to reboot. And so he did. And every time there's been worldwide disaster and destruction, it's because there's not enough kedusha, not enough holiness, counteracting the impurity in the world, the ungodliness, the lack of godliness in the world. And so therefore it goes back to tohu, null and void, chaos, because that's how creation reboots itself. And the Gemara talks about that, how it reboots itself, how God himself, in fact, imposes that, because God says, well, enough is enough. It's like we've gone this road before, it's already gone too far, and no one's making the positive changes. So, to make a long story short, hundreds of years of story, no matter what we might say about America, Hollywood, people like their movies. But as people have pointed out, things go on there, and the movies that are produced are things that if there was a Sanhedrin living today, we'd have to change those things very dramatically. There's lots of things taking place in the United States of America that does not speak in its favor, for sure. But overall, the country was based upon rules. And as long as those were the laws, that is the country. And it works both ways, by the way, because as the Malbim points out on a section of Tanakh, explains that, you can have people behaving in a way that's not sanctioned by Torah in any way. You can have people doing the wrong thing, but as long as the law is different, they're doing their own thing. They're doing it, and it should be stopped. And if people aren't stopping it, so they bear responsibility for not protesting. 100%. That's the way the Gemara discusses it. But as long as the law still reflects values that are similar to those expressed by the Torah on any level, then God has patience and the world can continue. But once you erode those values, you can talk about equal rights, and you can talk about freedom of speech, and you can talk about this politician and that politician, and this party and that party, and what we're going to change and why we should change it, and everyone jumps in the bandwagon and goes this way or they go that way. But the bottom line, when the smoke clears and the dust settles, what are the laws? What do the laws say? Where's society headed at this point in time? Two people could be on the exact same ladder, die in the exact same rung. One person goes to heaven, one person goes to hell. What's the difference? The direction their feet are facing. If one person was moving upwards, and they died in that particular rung 665, right? That's where they died. They go to heaven because that's where they would have gone anyhow. And the other guy who died on 665 as well, but he was on the way down. So therefore he keeps going down to where he's going to end up after it's all said and done. The direction, that's what counts in society. So yeah, we have to care. We have to care because there's no other place like America in the world. Even Eretz Yisrael, with its similarities, is more like Europe. There's lots of things in this country. Baruch Hashem, we have lots of yeshivas, but the Knesset, there's still a lot of religious law, but they're reading that too. It's also being chipped away at different forces who they don't necessarily believe that they're doing the wrong thing, but it's what keeps the world in check, that kedusha and that holiness. And when that disappears, we have big problems. America, it's got something, or at least it had something. And the fact that that's eroding, the fact that people are tearing that down, taking it away, and the very fact that they're going back and trying to eradicate the history that got them to this point is just another way of saying that we don't buy into any of that, not from the beginning. Because otherwise they'd say, well, this part is the part that is valuable, this is good, this is morality. We're not going to touch it, we won't change that. And this part, we need to revise it because that's what leads to all this inequality and backlash and things like that. So that we need to, and that's called an amendment. And they've been making amendments for the last couple hundred years. As things changed and they became smarter and realized, hopefully always for the better. But when you start uprooting the very basis of a society that was built upon concepts and ideas that come from the Torah, then you eradicate the entire thing. And then the world is in trouble. And that's usually when you get something like World War I or World War II. Yes, the voice of doom is always negative. I get in a lot of trouble for this. People will tell me, you're always so negative. You're always telling us, how things are going to go bad. Tell us how things can go good. Well, that's really the bottom line over here. If it wasn't for the fact we're looking to make things go good, what's the point of this discussion? Just let it go. America goes. So what? The Jews don't, whatever, people have the choices. They can do whatever they have to, but who cares? The fact that we're having this discussion, the fact that we're pointing out why it's important to fight to maintain those values, to save those values, to keep the people in power who uphold those values and get rid of the ones who don't, is because there's still hope. And that hope is that we can fix the situation on our own before God himself steps in and fixes it for all of mankind, which he has done, and not usually to our advantage, not in a way that we would have chosen given that choice. So yeah, in conclusion, we care, and we have to care because it affects all of us, no matter where we are in the world, no matter what we think, no matter which direction we're going. It's for the sake of all history and the sake of all mankind.
Amazing. There's some questions. If you have a minute, well, we're going to go through some of the questions. Reuven from Facebook is asking about the current political between Trump and Biden election and how do those impact the geula between them?
Well, I know, Reuven. It's a loaded question. It's a very difficult question to answer, and whether I'd like to answer it, even in a public forum like this. The truth is I'm wary of both possibilities because if, let's say, for example, President Trump were to win, and first of all, the backlash would probably be unbelievable. I don't know what would happen after that. But second of all, is that it just sort of maintains a status quo that in some respects pushes off the redemption because American Jewry figures, we got our way, so we can just keep doing the same thing we've been doing up until now. As someone pointed out, I think recently, an article that all that fervor that came because of Corona and the airlines shutting down and all that to come to Israel has been dampened in large part. People have kind of like cooled off. That's what Amalek does. As Rashi points out, he cooled us off. So maintaining the status quo has major issues in terms of the final redemption. Now, on the other hand, if Biden were to get in, everyone knows he's not the one who's going to be running the government. That's for sure. He's not capable of doing it, seems, according to what they say about him. And which means the people behind him are the ones who are pushing for the liberal agenda, which means the places that go further down that road and become a lot worse in that respect, and create all the scenarios that will be disastrous for the world and the Jewish people. So it's a lose-lose situation in many respects. So what's the win in all of that? The win in all of that would simply be for the Jewish people to wake up and say, we've reached the end of exile. We have to now focus on the redemption. We need to get back home. That would be, the saving grace of everybody, not just the Jewish people, but the entire world. So, we'll have to wait and see, God willing.
Stephen is asking about today's announcement. Is it one step forward or one step back?
Which announcement?
The peace agreement, I assume he's talking about between Israel and the United Arab Emirates.
Oh, I honestly, first, I don't know. I don't know enough about it at this point to even comment on it. I have to look more into it, but I don't know offhand.
Naomi is asking, some rabbis are saying that America is going to fall apart with her honorable history. Why would Hashem do that?
Well, like I said before, it's not so much a question of whether, Hashem allowed the temple to be destroyed, not once, but twice. We had a Holocaust. If history requires it, it doesn't mean he's not sad about it. Doesn't mean he doesn't wish it was different. Doesn't mean that he feels that this is a difficult thing for everybody. But if that's what history requires, that's what history will do. We've seen it all through history. So that we just have to do the best we can to avoid that type of a consequence.
Can we just also reinforce the fact that, the redemption and the Geula is not just for the Jews, although the Jews will play a very prominent role. But one of the reasons is the not destroying America is because it really was, even though based on Christianity, it was, like you pointed out, so I'd like to hear that again, that America was founded on Jewish concepts through Christianity, but the Israeli government has no connection, or doesn't discuss it, or doesn't mention "In God We Trust" or any kind of Torah values at all. So there's something that Hashem, in my opinion anyway, it doesn't mean much, but I think Hashem's going to really be very patient with America because the Jews and the people who believe in Him.
It's brought down in the Zohar, and the Gemara talks about it as well, but the Zohar says very specifically that every country is allowed to perform a certain amount of evil before God lowers the boom. In Egypt, it was a little bit premature because the Jewish people could not stay any longer. But in general, that God will take into account all the merits. America has many merits, whether they were always sincere about, but they've done a lot of good. They've been one of the most generous nations in the entire history of mankind. And they've done so much to try to help the world. Okay, spread democracy, yeah, but still, there's a lot of chesed in there, nonetheless. For everything that people complain, you can always say they didn't have to do it. The Russians just imposed their will. The Chinese just say, this is what we think, this is what we do, and here it is, folks. No chesed, no kindness, no wrapped up in helping you set up your own country. We're just going to do what we want over here. But the Americans, they were polite about it for the most part. And God takes that into account 100%. And that's probably why America has lasted this long, in spite of all the illicit behavior that's gone on in that country over the course of the last 100 years alone. So, but then it gets to the point, as the Zohar points out, if you feel that sa'ah, if you feel that basket, you feel that amount where God says that's the end of it, that's it. So then there are rules to creation. I was once told about somebody who ended up in court. He did something he shouldn't have done, and he didn't have to do it. He could have been careful about it and avoid it. And the judge turned to this person and said, I looked at your record. I've seen what you've done. I've seen what you've accomplished. You didn't need this. Why? Why did you do this? Why, in the end, did you allow yourself to get embroiled in this whole situation, get dragged down? Nonetheless, you have to go to jail because that's the rule. That's the law. So, God does the same thing as well. He takes it onto account. He balances it out. And a lot of grace, a lot of mercy, a lot of miracles have happened for America over the last couple hundred years for sure. But there gets to a point where, you run out of steam, you run out of payment. And then God has to do what he has to do.
Speaking of a Jewish connection to the announcement today, this is a picture that just came out of the announcement from the Oval Office. And as you can see, the president is surrounded by Jews. Jared Kushner, Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, David Friedman, the Ambassador, Berkowitz. You have all the Jews around him as he's making this announcement. So the Jews are definitely involved both here as well as there. Let's just see if we have any questions. Okay, I just wanted to thank Rabbi Winston for his weekly talk. It's always very informative. I want to encourage everyone to continue to join and to share this with other people. We want to try to get it out as much as possible. People that are interested in learning more about Rabbi Winston's books and his website, they can go to 36.org. This broadcast was brought to you by the bringthemhome.org.il and the Miriam Project Geula Hour. And I just want to have one last request from everybody. Those that have not yet gone to the YouTube channel, which this is on youtube.com Israel Torah, please go there and make sure to sign up. Let me just, for those people that are not aware of how one does that, if you go to the screen over here, you go to Israel Torah on YouTube, and then over here there will be a little button that says subscribe. You press on the subscribe button, and next to that will be a bell. If you press that bell, you will be notified if whenever we put up future videos. It's a whole series of inspirational videos, and by doing that, you support the channel and you help spread the word to other people. So we would appreciate that subscription. And again, thank you very much. Yudis, you have anything else to say before we conclude?
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very
much. Thank you, and have a great Shabbos. We look forward to good things and good news in the future.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. Good night.